Right, so the honourable profession of the journalist, keeping the public informed, telling truth to power, holding it to account. My goodness, we've got some poor ones in this country if that is what they are supposed to do, haven't we? But that isn't to say we don't have some truly excellent individuals and media outlets who are worthy of being called journalists. And over the last 10 months, certainly, we've seen many risk their lives to bring us the truth of what is happening in Gaza and beyond, as an example. Far too many losing their lives in the process too, despite targeting of journalists being, as you would imagine, a war crime. Where such people as they have risked their lives to bring us the truth, as seen on social media as well as through their outlets, mostly independent or foreign news outlets of course, our own here, have chiefly provided cover for our government with its pro-Israel leanings, not so much journalists as stenographers repeating what they are told to repeat, omitting to cover key events or presenting them in a disreputable and even dishonest manner. But it really does come to something when a journalist who sits in the middle of the Venn diagram of reporting the truth from the Middle East whilst also happening to be British can return home from the Middle East and get arrested on the spot for terrorism, when all he has actually done is his job. So is Richard Medhurst now the wrong kind of journalist for Keir Starmer's Britain then? Right, so the appalling, disgusting, deplorable arrest of Richard Medhurst as a journalist under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act, the first British journalist to ever be treated as such, should send shockwaves amongst the populace of this country, or at least might have had half a chance to if the excuses for journalism in our mainstream media here in the UK were covering this story, because yet again they are not. I sometimes get referred to as a journalist myself in comments to videos like this. I make plenty of them after all. I've always rejected the notion though. I'm just a guy with plenty to say, calling out those who should be saying it but aren't, who choose to call themselves journalists quite often, but are more often than not just repeating whatever they are told to print or say on TV by some anonymous source or another. But actually the reason I shun it is because frankly when you come across the crucial and important work some people worthy of the term journalists do, who actually studied to become journalists, because I didn't, and conduct themselves true to the nature of the profession, the reality is I'm mostly just referencing their work. Because the more such messaging is spread, as I try to do, the more people are better informed for it. Rarely do the decent reporters have the platforms they deserve to have. They are the journalists, not me, and Richard Medhurst is certainly one such person, doing crucial work, relaying important news events in a manner that are either not being covered at all or are being grossly misrepresented. But because all Medhurst has ever done is his actual job, and he does it well, covering the situation in the Middle East as he does, and does it honestly, fairly, and frankly embarrasses our government and mainstream media for its complicity in what Israel have been doing, he's been arrested as he returned to the UK at Heathrow Airport under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act of 2000. Reporting honestly the situation in the Middle East is now a terrorist offence, apparently, because that is all Medhurst has done. But under the terms of the law he was detained under, he was arrested for allegedly expressing an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organisation. Now let that one just sink in a moment. Expressing an opinion that might be construed as supportive of a prescribed organisation. Thought police. And yet this crime carries a potential jail sentence of some 14 years. Think about it. The laws you thought were designed to keep you safe from terror attacks are now being used to prevent you from learning the truth about what is going on in the world, depending on whether or not it is being committed by an ally of our government, whether they like it or not. Indeed, covering up possible terrorism our government could potentially be involved in itself stops us learning about the role our government plays in the world. Think about it a little bit more. And regular viewers of my channel, perhaps this is more one for yourselves. But whenever I have reported on the events going on in Gaza and in Israel or anywhere else in the world, look at the sources I often quote from on such things. It'll be outlets such as Al Jazeera or Al Mayadeen or the Daily Sabah or Anadolu Agency, Declassified UK, Squawk Box, The Grey Zone, The Cradle, independent journalists like Richard Medhurst, but also others like Bisan in Gaza or Jonathan Cook. You'll note not a single mainstream media outlet as a rule, because they either don't cover it or cover it up. Prior to social media, prior to so many more independent voices not beholden to coming from the right social class or coming from sufficient money to enter mainstream journalism, we relied on sources filled with people such as that previously, employing a narrative to support those acting not necessarily in our interests or the interests of others on the international stage. But now we aren't beholden to that anymore, are we? Not with social media, because it's given us so many alternatives. And the government needs to dumb us down again to get its way. And this is surely an example of them attempting to do that by force, by abusing the law, isn't it? That they are prepared to use terror legislation, it seems, to do that now. Is this not fascism? Medhurst was detained for 24 hours, wasn't allowed to contact his family, his friends. He was due to attend the Levellers' Beautiful Days Festival and speak on a panel with other voices speaking out for peace, speaking out against global atrocity, discussing what is going on in the world that is going grossly underreported or unreported at all by our establishment journalists, a panel of people such as Craig Murray and Low-Key, Jeremy Corbyn, David Miller, members of the Levellers band itself, and more. But of course, Medhurst didn't make it. And they had no idea what had happened to him at the time either. Now, it has been argued that the organisations that Medhurst has expressed support for might include Hamas and Hezbollah. Emphasis on the word might here, who are, of course, resisting Israel and its brutal occupation. And these are, of course, designated as terrorist organisations here in the UK, even though Hamas is the legitimate government of Gaza and Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese government too. It is perfectly legal in domestic law, however, in contrast to that, to support the Israeli Defence Force and even join it and fight in it, which, given their conduct that we've seen for the last 10 months and long before besides, should raise more of an eyebrow towards alleged terror offences and what really counts as terror, rather than how the Terrorism Act, already criticised for being too broad, and ironically criticised by Medhurst himself as he boarded his flight, apparently, might be abused instead. But even if you were to support Hamas or Hezbollah, they are currently involved in resisting occupation, resisting an invasion and a genocide. And just because our laws recognise this blatant atrocity as legitimate doesn't mean it is or should be. And in fact, there is a story rumbling around about how ministers could be personally implicated in war crimes themselves over their support for Israel. The mainstream media finally, after more than 48 hours of ignoring the story, covered the resignation of Foreign Office diplomat Mark Smith, after all, citing his fear of government complicity in war crimes. And now a legal opinion commissioned by campaign group Global Justice Now has suggested government ministers may well be in breach of international law as a result of aid and assistance given to Israel via a principle called vicarious liability. That might well make for another video, though, to go into further. However, if such ministers are guilty of complicity in war crimes, are they really the right people to be overseeing terrorism legislation against others? Besides, if we're going to go down the international law route for a moment, the International Court of Justice did, just the other week, issue an advisory opinion to the United Nations, who had asked for it, but the occupation of Palestinian territory by Israel is now illegal. That reference to supporting the IDF and legally enrolling in it, that would now be a crime under international law, even if it isn't under domestic law. You might dispute that based on the ICJ decision being only advisory, though. However, thankfully, there is another international law that covers this. It's a little thing. It's called the Geneva Conventions, most notably the first protocol of the Fourth Geneva Convention, protecting the rights of civilians in armed conflict. And even if you doubt that, and please do go ahead and read it for yourself, there is the additional issue that Palestine are a signatory state to the International Criminal Court and are cooperating with an investigation of theirs, which may of course lead to the issuing of arrest warrants for Netanyahu himself and the Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, all despite the UK not recognising Palestinian statehood, of course. Israel are not cooperating, funnily enough. Some will argue the ICC has no jurisdiction over them because they're not signatories, but quite honestly, that's functionally nonsense. Without veering too far off course from where this video began, however, fundamentally, international law trumps domestic, and therefore even if Medhurst could be said to have expressed opinions supportive of a prescribed body here in the UK, given the circumstances, international law supersedes it. Is our government going to follow international law it is signed up to, or not? Or is it going to punish people who are covered under it? What has been done to Richard Medhurst is the sort of thing we'd normally expect from Russia, or Belarus, or China, but it's not them doing this, it's us here in the UK. Medhurst is now out on bail. He has to report to the police again in 3 months' time. For what crime? Doing his damn job and reporting the truth, whether the powers that be or the establishment like it or not. If that is now a criminal offence, so is journalism itself, then we no longer have a free press. Journalism is not a crime. We're seeing crimes against journalists every day being committed in Gaza as more and more of them, real ones, lose their lives at the hands of the IDF. Now they have the additional fear of risking being locked up here for saying what they're seeing. We don't have political prisoners here in this country, we're told, and we've been told this before. That was a lie when Julian Assange was locked up. It was a lie when Craig Murray got banged up under similar legislation. It'll be a lie again if Richard Medhurst gets treated likewise too. And where will it end? Will we choose to all be gagged? Or will we all risk a jail cell for speaking out for what is right and fair and just? Whose side will you be on in that? Solidarity to Richard Medhurst. So many decent other journalists and commentators have got your back and won't be cowed into silence either. I'm one of them. Meanwhile, whilst our government continues to make itself allegedly complicit with Israeli war crimes, other nations are taking Israel to task. The lights might be going out in Israel very soon, thanks to Colombia, for example, as this video recommendation will give you all the details about. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.